In early 2026, the world witnessed one of the biggest and most complicated aerial attacks in recent memory unfold over the Middle East. So let's get right into it. We're going to break down the tactics, the targets, and really the strategic fallout from Iran's massive drone and missile campaign.
Now, to really wrap your head around the scale of what happened, we have to start with this one single number, 4,192. And believe me, this isn't just some dry statistic. It's the opening shot in a whole new kind of asymmetric warfare.
And yeah, that's what this number is. In just under 3 weeks, you're looking at a relentless barrage of weapons fired at 7 different countries. This was no small skirmish. This was a highly coordinated, incredibly intense air campaign. The whole point was to overwhelm and disrupt on a scale we haven't seen before.
So the big question is, what was the official reason for an attack of this size? And this is where we start to see this huge gap between what they said they were doing and what was actually happening on the ground.
Publicly, Iran's story was pretty straightforward. They framed this whole thing as a targeted retaliation. They claimed they were only going after American military interests and that, any country hosting those forces was fair game. It's a very specific and, you could say, a very limited justification.
But the story coming from the nations on the receiving end was completely different. The damage reports weren't just listing military bases. No, they were talking about hits on major international airports, residential areas, and the critical energy infrastructure that is, quite literally, the economic lifeblood of these countries.
Okay, so let's zoom in a bit and break down the specifics. Who got hit the hardest? And what exactly were these thousands of drones and missiles actually aimed at? When you look at the data, a very deliberate strategy starts to emerge.
Now, what's so fascinating here is the distribution. I mean, just look to the UAE. We're talking over 2,000 projectiles in total. This wasn't some even, random spread. It was a very focused effort. They were using this mix of high-speed missiles to try and punch through defenses, and then just swarms of cheaper drones to totally saturate them. The sheer volume aimed at key U.S. allies, it's just staggering.
And this right here shows you exactly where those weapons landed. We are talking about major international hubs like Dubai's airport, enormous oil refineries like Ras Tanura, and critical industrial sites like the Emirates Global Aluminum Plant. Hitting these doesn't just cause damage right then and there. It cripples economies, it messes up global supply chains, and it spreads a whole lot of fear. So the bottom line is, the list of targets went way beyond military installations.
So this brings us to the core tactical fight, right? What we saw was a classic case of an asymmetric strategy. It was a high-volume, relatively low-cost offense going up against an incredibly high-tech and extremely expensive defense.
You see, Iran's playbook was pretty clear. Just throw more stuff at the wall than the defenders could possibly hope to intercept. Use thousands of these relatively cheap drones to force the other side to fire off their multi-million-dollar Patriot missiles. It's a battle of attrition. For every single successful interception, the defenders were burning through an incredibly expensive and limited resource, while the offense could just keep the pressure on.
And that leads to the really critical question. The Gulf states and their allies, they did intercept thousands of these things. They saved countless lives and prevented even more destruction. But that success, well, it came at a very steep, almost unsustainable cost. I mean, just look at these numbers. Security analysts estimate that in less than a month, Bahrain burned through something like 87% of its entire stockpile of critical interceptor missiles. The UAE and Kuwait both used up about 3/4 of theirs. This is the very definition of a Pyrrhic victory. You win the battle, sure, but you're left dangerously exposed for whatever comes next.
So, what happens when the smoke finally clears? Well, this campaign fundamentally changed the security situation in the region. It created a new and frankly much more volatile reality.
Before the attacks, the Gulf states were really pushing for caution and de-escalation. But as this shows, after weeks of their cities and their economies being under fire, that position completely hardened. They went from seeking diplomacy to demanding that Iran's offensive capabilities be significantly weakened. The entire strategic calculus had changed.
So the takeaways here are pretty profound. First, missile defenses were worn down to critical levels. The economic damage was not a short-term problem. Some of these places needed a year of repairs. Global shipping lanes were suddenly at a much higher risk. But maybe the biggest lesson of all was that it exposed a massive vulnerability, that even the most advanced, most expensive air defense systems in the world can be overwhelmed by a determined, high-volume saturation attack.
And that really leaves us with a final and crucial question for the future of warfare. Was this just a display of Iran's military power?
Or did we all just witness a live-fire demonstration of the new blueprint for how to defeat modern, state-of-the-art air defenses? The answer to that is probably going to shape military strategy for decades to come.